Hello. In today's lecture, we're going to kind of work through the second step in the framework that we started talking about last lecture. We got through the scope statement, and now the next step is to actually start planning the project. So that is the step that we'll look forward or look to go over today. Okay. The different parts of the actual project plan you can see are listed on the screen here. So we're going to talk about coming up with the different tasks that need to happen in order to accomplish the goal that is stated on the scope statement. We'll look at putting start and finish dates to each of the tasks. We'll look to see if there's any milestones that we can identify to, again, help us keep on track throughout the process. And then we actually assign individuals within our team to the different tasks that we identify. So those are the major steps that you'll take, during this phase of the framework. So the WBS is what you'll typically hear kind of referred to here for this phase. So once the scope statement's identified and created, we'll move on to the planning phase and we create our WBS, which is also which stands for work breakdown structure. Here, the idea is you can see to really identify what is our goal, what are we trying to accomplish, what does that end result look like, and then trying to step off of that and say, okay, if we need to complete X by the end of the semester, what steps do we have to take in order to be able to complete that task? And that's what the breakdown structure does. It kind of takes apart that final project into smaller, maybe more manageable tasks. So we'll identify these different sub-deliverables is what they're referred to. And then for each sub-deliverable, we'll look at creating tasks that need to be done in order to get that sub-deliverable completed. Once all the sub-deliverables are completed, ideally, your overall task is completed as well. The book looks at a project called Project Caffeine to identify or to help kind of walk through the different steps. So it's a very simple project. Most likely we would not need to put a scope and WBS around a project like this, but it does a good job of identifying, hopefully helping you understand the different parts of the scope and the different parts of the WBS that we'll be talking about. For Project Caffeine, the scope statement's been identified or been completed. You can see kind of the mission. So the mission is to produce 4 mugs of hot coffee. The mission also identifies when that needs to be accomplished. So there's an end date involved that needs to be done by 8 a.m. on Friday, May 4th. So this is a project that's already been completed here this past semester. And it also talks about what does it mean to actually complete this project. So it talks about delivering the coffee to the CMIS department conference room by 8 o'clock on Friday. All right, so it's very specific of what needs to be done. So as the project manager, the project team, I know what we need to accomplish. Right? And so you can, just for kind of review's sake of what a scope statement should look like, you see the justification. Why do they need these 4 cups of coffee on Friday? The justifications that Friday's going to be a long day. It's the last day of finals. Faculty need the caffeine to keep them from falling asleep while grading papers. All right? So that's the reason behind it. The assumptions are that the coffee maker, the filter, 4 mugs are going to be available. And so, again, those are things that I will not have to worry about as the project manager tracking down or, buying or bringing myself. Those things will be available for us to use. And then identifying the different stakeholders in this project. So you can see who the project sponsor and the client is the same person, the project manager, and there's 1 team member on this particular project. The parts of the scope statement that you don't see up here is the communication plan and then also the documentation plan, but those would be typically included in the scope statement. All right, so based on that mission, right, so that's what we want to hone in on at this point is what do we want to produce? So we're producing 4 mugs of hot coffee by that end date. So now as we start looking at identifying kind of what our our final project is, and therefore what are those sub-deliverables. How can we break that down? We can ask ourselves these questions. What is the final end product? Are there any sub-deliverables noted in the scope statement? So sometimes the scope statement might be pretty specific and identify some of these sub-deliverables already for you for the project team. And then what sub-deliverables must be produced to deliver the end product. All right, so we're trying to think about kind of what steps do we have to take to accomplish being able to deliver 4 mugs of coffee by that deadline. So you can see kind of here's this kind of breakdown, this hierarchy that the definition kind of talks to. So you can see at the top here, this is what we're wanting. Our final product needs to be 4 mugs of hot coffee. And now if we kind of brainstorm as a group, what is it going to take to do that? So that's what the sub-deliverables are. Water in the coffee maker, coffee in the coffee maker. We need to brew the coffee, and then we also need to pour the coffee. Again, very simplistic, but that's the idea, to break it down. And the idea is that these 4 sub-deliverables combined, if we do all of these things, that will equal us being able to have a completed project. Okay, and so that's what we want to think about as a group. You want to identify kind of what that end result is, right? And then what's it going to take? What are the different steps that we're going to have to take in order to get that completed, right? So then once we kind of identify what those sub-deliverables are, the next thing is to look at what are the different tasks for each of those sub-deliverables. All right, so you can see some of the questions on the screen. What task must be completed to produce water in the coffee maker, right? That was one of our sub-deliverables. And so we start thinking about it. We got to fill the decanter with water. We got to pour water from the decanter into the coffee maker, right? Those are the task. And once I do those 2 things, that sub-deliverable is done, right? And so then you'd go on, what task must be completed to produce coffee in the coffee maker? And you would identify those tasks. All right, so you can see that our hierarchy here has another layer. So we have the top layer, which is our final project. Then we have our 4 sub-deliverables that we identify, right? And then each sub-deliverable has the different tasks that need to be accomplished in order to complete that higher sub-deliverable. So again, I complete these 2 things, that means this is done, and we're 1 step closer to completing our project. Right, and again, complete these 2 things, that sub-deliverable then is completed. And again, now looks like about halfway done with being able to accomplish our project. All right, and so as a team, that's what you're going to be looking at. You're going to look at that scope statement, that mission part of the scope statement specifically, and be able to identify this higher level kind of project and then break it down. This is just a visual way of doing it. For those people that like kind of that visual, to kind of see the different levels, the different steps of breaking it down. So doing it in this kind of hierarchy form is not necessarily necessary, I guess, to do it in this visual way. Because once you identify these steps, you'll actually put it in a different format. But this is, again, just one way to help kind of break it down. And so what we're going to use, there's a template in Blackboard. I don't even know if it's out there, to be honest with you, because it is a little confusing, because it's a little different than what the expectation is. So we'll use a tool in this class called Smartsheet, and I'll introduce that during our face-to-face time. But that's where you'll transfer the stuff that we were just looking at, the different sub-deliverables and tasks, into the Smartsheet. And essentially, Smartsheet is kind of just a fancy Excel spreadsheet. But right now, I just want you to focus in on this task name column. So you can see the bolded areas are our sub-deliverables, right? Those are the things that we identified on that chart as our sub-deliverables. And then underneath it, kind of indented in, are the tasks that we identified. In class, I'll show you how to make these connections, but essentially what you're seeing here, these little dashes here, that shows me, it shows the project manager, the team, that it communicates that these are tasks, right? That, because if I was in the smart sheet right now, I could click on that dash, and these two things would roll up into this line, so we won't even see them. But you'll have to, I'll show you how to kind of create those relationships so we can see kind of what is a major task and then what are kind of the smaller tasks that need to be completed. All right, so that's how you'll kind of take that hierarchy that we just looked at and convert it into the smart sheet column. So again, that's what I was saying. I won't collect the hierarchy. It's just one way, for the group to maybe break it down and look at it a little differently. But you'll definitely need to do it in this format and put it into the task. The next step of the WBS kind of phase, or the planning phase, is to look at these what are called task dependencies, also known as predecessors. And the idea is to say, is there some things that have to be done before I can move on? Because there might be some things in your project that you can do simultaneously, and you don't have to wait for step 3 to be done before moving on to step 4. We can do 3 and 4 together. But other times there are going to be kind of those relationships where step 3 has to be done before we can move on to step 4, or step 3 has to be done before we can start step 5, whatever it might be. And so we want to identify those things, and that's what the task dependencies are getting the group to look at and identify. So you can see at the bottom here, that I have to, A1, which was identified as fill the decanter with water, has to happen before I can actually pour the water into the coffee maker. So again, pretty simplistic, but that's the idea here. All right, and so if we, just going to advance through here because I want to show you the smart sheet, kind of just to give you an idea of what that looks like. So you can see on the smart sheet our predecessors right here. That's that column. And so you simply just identify what line needs to be done before I could do this line, right? So here it's identifying line 2. So line 2 is right here. So I have to fill the decanter with water. That has to be done before I can actually do this line. Okay, so it's pretty simple. You won't have a predecessor for everything, but for those things that there are some specific things that have to be done in order for us to complete that task, we want to identify those for the team, just so we're scheduling things correctly and we're aware of those, those relationships. The other thing that I kind of skipped through to get here, that's part of the planning process, is to start putting the start and finish date. All right, so when do we want to start this particular step, and when do we expect it to be done? So again, very simplistic project here. All these things are going to be done within the same day. Okay, and that's what you break it down to. One day is the shortest amount of time that you should be working in. You're not working in hours or minutes. It's days, okay? And some things are going to take more than a day. Some things are going to take, you're going to allow yourself a week to do these things. So when you start kind of calendaring your events, don't think about necessarily how long it's going to actually take you to have the meeting, right? So say you know, in your project, you plan to have a meeting on day 4. So you have, group meeting as one of your kind of sub-deliverables, or maybe one of a task underneath the sub-deliverable. That meeting in itself might take 30 minutes, right? But let's give ourselves a day to get that accomplished. Or maybe I even give myself a week to have that meeting, because by the time I plan it, and coordinate it, there's other things that are involved in that meeting. So kind of think about it that way, not just how long the actual meeting will take, but allowing ourselves time to coordinate schedules and to get something planned out there. So in Smartsheet, actually, if you put a start date in here, your start and finish dates, the duration column will automatically populate based on the dates that you put in. All right, so those things will automatically populate for you. And again, these will be in days, not minutes like you see here, because our project does not go down to that level. Another thing that gets identified during the planning phase are the milestones, if there are any. So again, you can see, I think in the earlier, initiating phase, I used kind of construction as an example of building a house. And so you might have milestones identified that can help us keep on track, so I have a little leeway, but by this date, is the foundation poured and settled, right? Because if it's not, if we don't meet that milestone, then it potentially is going to push other things off, right? And so we might identify those things throughout the project. Again, you might have them, you might not. They're typically stated as questions on your WBS, and they will have a date associated with them. But they're usually kind of yes or no questions. And again, just to really try to help the group stay on track. All right, so a milestone moment for Project Caffeine, is the coffee brewing. So if that coffee needs to probably be brewing by a certain time in order for us to be able to complete the project on time by 8 o'clock, have things poured and delivered, right? And so that might be a milestone that we might ask, is the coffee brewing, and have kind of specific time that we need to make sure that that is happening. And then the last thing that you're asked to do in terms of the planning process is to start assigning the different tasks that you identified to particular people, to a specific person within your group. Ideally, you are identifying just one person per task, even though you might be working as a group on that task, and that's fine. But you still want to identify who is the one person ultimately responsible for making sure that task gets done. Right? Again, multiple people can be working on it together, but you need to have one person that's being held accountable for that particular task. So for each task that you identify, you'll have a person assigned to that task. Okay. And that really sums up the planning process. So you have your scope statement, you're able to move on to the planning phase. The planning phase is really identifying your work breakdown structure, right? So that WBS is looking at what our ultimate goal is and breaking that down to the smaller steps, right? So what steps do we have to take in order to complete this project by the date, right? And then we start identifying the different tasks and the different people that are in charge of each of those tasks, right? And that's it. And we'll use Smartsheet in order to do that. Okay, so we'll have plenty of practice with this, and I'll introduce Smartsheet in class. But if you have any questions, let me know.